This video deals with the constitution of Imperial Japan in the Weimar Republic. Why is it that we're doing this? We're doing this because students often have difficulty understanding the constitution of the Weimar Republic and Imperial Japan. They confuse the two, and it's important to actually know the difference, because some people claim that the reason why democracy never really worked out in this period, it's because of the constitution. The constitution is the written laws of a nation state. So now let's look at the Weimar government as well as Imperial Japan. In the Weimar government, the constitution is called the Weimar Constitution, and that picture that you see behind is the Reichstag. In Japan's case, it's called the Meiji Constitution, and the Meiji Constitution is supposed to be a gift that's given by the emperor to the people. Now we have very different starting points for the development of democracy. The constitution states that there is a head of state, which is what this slide shows you. The head of state is important because he symbolizes the unity and the sovereignty of the country. In the case of Germany, before World War I, we had Friedrich Wilhelm II, and then we had two other presidents, Friedrich Ebert and von Hindenburg. And the one that most people will be familiar with will be Adolf Hitler. In the case of Japan, the period that you are studying will involve Emperor Meiji and his son, Emperor Taisho, and Emperor Hirohito in the 1930s. Emperor Hirohito will be the main person that we will need to know if we study events in the 1930s. The head of government is the leader of the executive branch of the government. He carries on the business of government and leads his team of ministers to control the central institutions of the government. These are the ministries, these are the civil service, and these are the government offices. In the case of Germany, the head of government is the chancellor. The one that you'll be familiar with is Franz von Papen and later on Hitler. Hitler will be chancellor in 1933 when Hindenburg as well as Franz von Papen decide that they will take a chance on Hitler being the prime minister or the chancellor. In the case of Japan, the head of executive or the head of government is the prime minister. So these people that you see here are from the Meiji period. The last surviving one will be the one that you see on your right, Seiyonji Kenmochi. In the 1930s, the two prime ministers will be assassinated because of their run-ins with the military government or the military forces, Hamaguchi Osaki as well as Tsuyoshi. So their assassination exemplifies the tensions that you have between party politics as well as the militaries. By 1934, Okada Keisuke will have a cabinet that is made up mainly of army officers and navy admirals, as well as top government officers. Some say this is the turning point where Japan's become militarist. 10 out of 15 people in his cabinet will be from the military. So this is a turning point for Japan. In the late 1930s, you will have Prince Fumimaro Konoe. He is responsible for the period where Japan invades China in 1937. And when war breaks out, the World War II or the war in the Asia Pacific, the bombing of Pearl Harbor is decided by Hideki Tojo. He is one of the main decision makers in terms of how World War II breaks out. The general and the oligarchs. This institution is very peculiar in the case of Japan because the general is a Japanese institution. It is an unofficial designation. It is made up of the founding fathers or elder statesmen that dates back to the Meiji Emperor. The Meiji Emperor, as well as the elder statesmen and the general, are from the 1860s and from the 1870s. Ito Hirobumi is important because he's a Democrat. he gets assassinated earlier on in Korea. Yamagata Aritomo, he's a militarist, and he is determined to actually ensure that the military generals are placed in power. Seiyonji Kinmochi, the last surviving Meiji politician, he will try to ensure that Japan stays on the path of parliamentary democracy, stays on the path of the middle way. He's trying to compromise the different factions that you see. The legislative. The legislative is the branch of government that is charged with making and modifying laws in the country. The legislative levies and collects taxes, they make budget decisions, they make different policies, and ensure that the laws are fair and ensure the well-running of the government. In Germany, this is the Reichstag. So, the Reichstag is the legislative assembly in Germany that decides the laws of the country. This is a modern picture of the Reichstag that has been rebuilt. This is a picture of the Reichstag in the 1930s, and by 1933, Hitler is in power, fully. In the case of Japan, the Legislative Assembly is called the Diet. The building was built in 1936, and you will notice that on your left-hand side is a statue of Ito Hirobumi. This is the Diet today, and the images that you see in the interior. The emperor will be seated in the Diet, and he is represented there. However, the powers of the Diet is very much more limited compared to the Weimar government. The army and the navy. In the case of Germany, there are strong civil-military relations. This means that the army is loyal to the head of state and to the head of government. This is the German General Staff together with Friedrich Wilhelm II in World War I. All the officers are from the German Officer Training School. In other words, you have strong military-civil relations. It means that the army is responsible to the Chancellor of Germany and the President. The Wehrmacht is the regular army that you see in the picture on your right. Hitler will create the Waffen-SS, or the SS groups led by Heinrich Himmler. This is like the personal bodyguard or the personal armies of Nazi Germany. So quite different in terms of how they think, in terms of the ideology, in terms of their fanatical loyalty to Hitler. In the case of Japan, there is a tension between the army and the navy, very much unlike Germany. The Japanese army is made up of two different factions, the moderate control faction and the Kodaha Imperial faction. The control faction is moderate. They are made up of senior commanders in the army, and they are moderate in their views. However, they think that war with the West, especially the USA, is bound to happen, and they believe that the government should prepare for this. They want the government to work closely with the zaibatsus, or the industry, to develop new weapons. They would give key industry sectors or important construction projects to these zaibatsus. The other group, the Imperial Way faction, is made up mainly of junior officers and some military commanders who held more radical views. The Kodoha or Imperial Way faction wanted to set up a military government which will be truly loyal to the emperor. They wanted to promote totalitarian, militaristic, and aggressive expansionist ideals. They believed that Japan should emphasize the martial spirit of Bushido. They also believe that expansion into Manchuria, Mongolia, and China is Japan's true destiny. The Japanese Navy is also split into different factions. One seeks to actually expand their fleet and create a first-class modern fleet that can rival USA and Japan, and that's called the Fleet faction. The other faction is the Treaty faction. They believe that it's important to conclude treaties with the West, like the Washington Naval Conference of 1930, and to make agreements to ensure global stability and peace. The treaty faction believe that a good way to ensure that the Navy is still allowed to maintain its control of the Pacific is through treaties. So these two groups or factions again clash. So in conclusion, the main difference that I hope you understand is that studying the Constitution of Japan and knowing how the army and navy factions compete with one another is important, so that you'll be able to understand how the Constitution impedes democracy in the 1920s and the 1930s in Germany as well as in Japan.